Alrighty then, how's it going, guys? And welcome to part 3 of Beverage 101. So, as I mentioned last time, today we're going to be discussing spirits. Now, what is a spirit? Well, the term actually originates from the Middle East, where, many years ago, with the what do you call it, the alchemists, the Islamic alchemists who were, distilling things for medicinal purposes back then. They actually referred to the vapor that came off the still as the spirit of the liquid, so hence the term spirits. So related to that, a spirit, by definition, is an alcoholic beverage that has been through the process of distillation. Now, what is distillation? Well, I've drawn up this very crude, very silly little diagram for you guys. So, what we have here is a still, okay? And you've got your fire or your heating underneath. Now, stills are usually made out of copper, but there's lots of different types, and they have, many different methods of doing this, but this is essentially the basic way of how it works. So you've got your still here, and you've got your fermented, your basic fermented stuff here, and you heat it up, and it evaporates, and the vapors come through the piping into a cooling chamber, around some coils where they condense and turn back into liquid, and the liquid that comes out here is called the distillate. Now, so the idea of distillation is two things. One, you're going to refine the liquid, so you're removing impurities, and two, you're separating the water and the alcohol. And the more times you distill it, the more impurities you will be removing, and the more water you'll be removing from it. Why does that happen? Well, because alcohol evaporates fast, as you know. You light it on fire, it evaporates by itself. So when you apply some heat to a, let's say, the premix, which would probably be like maybe 15% alcohol, probably less, depending on how you fermented it and how much sugar and yeast you used. Basically, you're removing the water component and you're concentrating the alcohol component. So now, all spirits are distilled, and they come into 5 different categories. You've got vodka, rum, tequila, gin, and whiskey. Alright, so, and as I mentioned in my fermentation video, all of these spirits are made with the essential ingredients, which is water, sugar, and yeast. Okay, so with vodka, right, vodka is made from either grain or potatoes. Now, it can be made, like, vodka is actually quite interesting because it can actually be made with anything. The definition of vodka, like the most common definition of vodka these days, vodka can even be made it can be even made using milk fat. If you remember in my fermentation video, I mentioned that you can make alcohol using lactose. A really good example of that is a vodka which I absolutely love. It's a Spanish vodka called Sidra Lacti, which is distilled using milk fat. Now, they get the lactose from the milk fat, and they just add yeast and distill it, and what you end up with is this like really, like almost creamy mouthfeel. It's amazing. It's really, really interesting. So basically, when we're talking about vodka, it can be made with anything, but it is most commonly made these days with either potato or grain. Grain is the most common, because it yields a very clean, crisp taste, and it's easier to work with than potatoes, and most likely cheaper. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I'm pretty sure. So, now a good vodka is actually characterized by not having any taste. The less taste there is in vodka, the better it is, and they usually achieve that by distilling it multiple times. Most commonly, when you see vodka, it will be distilled at least 3 times. Then, coming up next, we've got rum. Now, rum is a very, very old drink. It has its origins traced back actually to the Malayan archipelago, where the locals used to brew a non-distilled sugarcane-based beverage called brum. Now, because this is such an old sort of thing, it's not 100% known, but this is where most people guess that it came from. So, as I just said, rum is made from sugarcane. It is distilled from sugarcane. So the sugar in the mix actually is the sucrose from the sugarcane. And rum comes in two different types. You've got your white rums and your dark rums. White rum is distilled using refined sugar, hence the reason it is white. It's either white or a very sort of pale yellow. It tends to be pretty sharp on the palate and is really good for using in cocktails because of the fact that it's very bold and very sharp and strong. And then you've got dark rums. Now, dark rums are typically distilled from the byproducts of the sugar process, such as molasses, right? Typically, also with dark rums, they'll either spice them, add some spices into it, or they will add some coloring and flavoring. After rum, you've got tequila. Tequila is a spirit which originates from Mexico, and it is made from a special type of cactus called the agave cactus. It looks a bit like, if you've ever seen it looks like a cross between an aloe vera plant and a pineapple plant. Like it's just the cactus, and it grows like this, and it's got these big, huge leaves and really thick, wide ones. And tequila is made from the leaves of the agave cactus. Now, anybody who hasn't tasted tequila will not realize this, but anybody who does knows that tequila generally tastes pretty bad. But that's just the cheap stuff. If you are willing to spend a little bit more money on your tequila, there are lots of tequilas out there that are actually quite damn tasty. Most popular of which would be Patron. I think everybody's heard of Patron. Is like the world leader in tequila, and it's like very middle shelf. It's pretty well. I mean, the silver, the Patron Silver, is very middle shelf. It's quite approachable, and it tastes very nice. So after tequila, we've got gin. Now, gin is actually distilled from a grain spirit, much like vodka. The only difference is that it is after the first distillation. When they do the second distillation, they infuse it with juniper. Now, gin must contain juniper. Juniper is what makes gin. And you've got two different kinds of gin. You've got London Dry and Botanical. Now, London Dry gins must be at least 51% juniper. For a gin to be classified as a London Dry gin, it must have at least 51% juniper. If it doesn't have 51% juniper, then it's a botanical gin. There are lots and lots and lots of different types of gin, but the most popular ones that people probably heard of are Beefeater, Tanqueray, and Hendrick's. These three very, very, very common, very popular. Gin is also quite possibly the most popular alcoholic beverage in the world at the moment, most popular spirit in the world at the moment. And for me personally, it is my personal favourite. I love myself a gin and tonic. So lastly, we've got the most complicated one, which is whiskey. Now, whiskey is distilled from either one or a blend of 4 different types of grains. You've got corn, barley, wheat, and rye. Now, each one of those types of grains produces a very different type of whiskey. Corn whiskies tend to be a bit sweeter and sharper. Wheat whiskies tend to be softer and more floral. And rye whiskies tend to be quite spicy. As for barley, I think barley is a pretty sort of middle range one. And then also, going further into whiskies, we won't discuss it today on today's video, but going in further into whiskies, you've got single malts, you've got blends, you've got Irish whiskey, you've got Scotch, you've got bourbon. You know, there's whiskey is a fascinating drink, and there's just so much to learn about it, and it can get very confusing, which is why I'm not going to go into too much detail about it today. So that about wraps it up. I just wanted to cover the basics of spirits with you guys. If you have any questions, please leave them in a comment down below, and until next time, have a good one.